It's such a pleasure to be here with my colleague Lucy, who we'll meet in a moment. And we're going to talk about fertility. Why didn't anyone teach me this? So let's move on to the... So I've been doing a lot of work in schools in the UK, but also with colleagues in Belgium and Japan, and also Greece. And we asked young people in schools, what do they know about their reproductive health? Now, I know in Amsterdam you have things very progressive, but probably most of you here were taught how not to get pregnant. Is that right? Yes. Their teachers don't want you to get pregnant. So what we're aware that there's lots of things about our reproductive bodies, and we've all got one, and we weren't taught about those things. So I know this graph's a bit detailed, so I'll just tell you some of the things. The top things, these were the questions we asked young people in the 4 countries I mentioned. So have you learnt about things like contraception, STIs, and those sorts of things? Yes, they'd learnt about that. But we've got on there things like menopause. Oh, I'm going to talk about menopause today. And menopause, about 10% of kids in the UK had learned about it, but about 2 to 3% had learned about things like polycystic ovary syndrome and endometriosis. Now, we've got probably a lot of females in this room, and these diseases affect 1 in 10 women. So someone in here, a few people in here have got these. And Rena, my PhD student's in the audience, she's been doing the work studying these results from these young people. So I want young people around the world to understand everything about their body. Now, we are going to talk about everyone here. We're not just going to talk about females, but one thing to start off with, the female anatomy. Now here, I have a lovely little womb. It's about life size, actually. So there's the womb here. These are the fallopian tubes, and these are the ovaries. And this is what we're going to spend the next few minutes starting our talk talking about. Shall I throw her out? Whee! Try and bring her back. Woohoo! I've got something more exciting to throw out in a moment. So, the female anatomy, that's the structure. We've got then, leading down from that, we've got the cervix, and then we've got the vagina. Let's get a bit more into detail. So, the vulva. Can we start by everyone shouting out, vulva? Oh, yes, yes. It's a brilliant word. And do you know what? Sometimes when I post on Instagram, it says this post might be offensive. Isn't that unbelievable? Vulva is not an offensive word. But do you know, unfortunately, some people don't use the right words for the female anatomy. So they're always talking about the vagina. They're obsessed with the vagina. The vagina is just the opening that leads up to the womb, and it's where we menstruate from, where we have a baby from. And in some sex acts, if we're having penetrative sex, we often have a penis or something else in there. So that's the vagina and the vulva. And the vulva is a beautiful structure. It's basically all the external bits that a woman has between her legs. And just through a few varieties, they're all very different and individual and beautiful. So there's no right or wrong. They're all individual, and every vulva is beautiful. Woo! Do we know what this is? Oh, a clitoris! Guess what I have? A clitoris! I think one of my sons might be here now, but I've always got the standing joke that men don't know where it is. It's in my hand now. So the clitoris that you see is just this little bit here. And then it's got these beautiful bulbs that come off. And they've all got thousands of nerve endings in. And if you stimulate a woman and get these bits going, it's wonderful. I'm throwing her out. Where's the womb gone? Where's the womb? I'm going to do this side, this side. Are we ready? Clitoris! Woo! Okay. And do you know it was fairly recently that the clitoris was actually defined? Up until recently, we thought it was just that little bit that sticks out. That is unacceptable. Anyway, let's move on. The penis! Woohoo! Shout out penis! Penis! Okay. We know the penis, wonderful structure, but it has some hard work to do. get erect, it has to ejaculate. It's a lot of stress for all you people with a penis out there. And these wonderful testicles at the end. And again, I would say to everyone, if you have kids or when you have kids, teach them the right words. Teach them vulva, teach them penis. It's not all these other things like, muffin and all the words that we use for our genitalia, foo-foo and anything else. Let's use the proper words for our genitals because they're great and they bring us lots of pleasure. Okay, a bit of science now. We are doing science and cocktails. So let's talk about hormones. Hormones are really, really powerful substances that go throughout our body. And in men, they stay fairly constant from puberty until death. But in women, they fluctuate and give us this menstrual cycle. Now, men and women have the same hormones, but men have a lot of testosterone, which you've probably all heard about, but they do have the others I'm going to mention. But in the female reproductive system, these hormones are oscillating around about 28 days. I'm going to tell you more about that. So we've got things like estrogen, we've got this hormone here, luteinizing hormone, we've got progesterone. So they're very powerful, and what they can really do to a woman is affect how she feels physically and psychologically, basically every day of her fertile life, which is from puberty to the menopause. So it can have a big influence on her. Oh, there we go, the technology's working. So, I run a podcast called a very similar title, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? And I've interviewed Alina. Alina set up an app where she wanted to help women measure their ovulation, I'm going to talk about, and also their period. And I was very aware. I've written a book called Your Fertile Years. I've got a few in the reception for sale. Now, when I wrote that, I looked at some of the original research. The research which said women have a 28-day cycle was on a few hundred women back in the 70s. And guess what? They all had normal BMI. They were all Caucasian. And when I contacted Lena, I said to her, I want to have a look at your big data from the women using your app. And we looked at over 600,000 menstrual cycles, and we really recharacterized it. I'll show you some of the data here. So the two key parts of your menstrual cycle, as I've said, are ovulation when the egg's released, and your period, which you have if you haven't got pregnant. So you're taught in schools that you have a 28-day cycle. This graph here is very typical of what you get in schools. 28-day cycle, and you ovulate around day 14. Our big data that I got with Alina didn't show that. It showed that about 65% of women had a 25 to 30-day cycle, and only 13% had a 28-day cycle. We're not an algorithm, we're not a textbook, we're individual, and we all do this differently. And ovulation, we teach in schools it's day 14, and lots of the apps that people use say it's day 14. Big data from us and others said it's actually nearer day 16. Can I just have a show of hands? Anyone here use any sort of period tracker or anything? I don't know, I don't have any periods. So quite a lot, look around. Lots of people use them. And I think they're great, but they do have a few issues. You can come and ask me afterwards. So, I've also done a lot of work around periods. We've just finished a big series of focus groups asking women of different ages to tell us about their period. They have a tough time. This is something I did in schools. This is using an online questionnaire during a lecture. Girls, I said to them, how does your period affect your well-being? Just read that. That's 15-year-old girls telling us that they are really affected by their period. It is really tough at the beginning for those girls. I don't want that. I want women to be able to get support and know what's normal and what's not normal. So, before I hand over to Lucy, my last slide, I'm going to talk about the fertile window. So as I said, you're taught in school how not to get pregnant. This is what you need to do if you want to get pregnant. And not everyone does. The studies we've done, about 60% of people, especially school kids, said they want to have kids. It's a decision we can do now. Back in the 60s, you couldn't. If you had sex, you probably got pregnant before the pill was invented. So actually, the fertile window is only 6 days of our menstrual cycle. It's the day that we ovulate. The day we ovulate, the egg exists for about 24 hours. And the 5 days before that, the sperm can exist in the female genital tract. So if you ovulate on day 16, you have intercourse on day 11, you can get pregnant. So there's ways of testing this, and Lucy's going to tell you a bit more about this. You can measure your temperature, you can look at your cervical mucus, and that hormone that was in the middle of the menstrual cycle, you can measure that now with a urine test. So, enough of me for now. I'm very pleased to introduce Lucy.
When I imagine my eggs, I think of them as gray and shiny, like slippery helium balloons clustering in the thousands within organs lit up and awake. I think of eggs enfleshed in follicular cavities, pulsing patiently, with only an occasional burst, membrane breaking at the touch of engorged fimbriae, fallopian fingers brushing against ovarian skin. My eggs become palpable within two pulsing opals, shielded by hip bones, roused with embodied symbolism. Hypnagogic, I dream them into being, a fiction of the body. These are the opening words of my book, which I wrote about egg freezing, and I wrote this because I feel like our bodies are often described in the language of success and failure, but I want to celebrate the body. So here I am, dressed as a fallopian tube, to share the absolute wonder of our reproductive embodiment, and particularly our very cool eggs, whether or not they fertilize. So let's talk about this part, our amazing bodies, and not just the eggs, but there's another really cool part, which is the cervix. So who of you here has seen their own cervix? Yay! Yay, great, very good. So you can get a speculum and a mirror and have a look at your own cervix. If you don't have a cervix, you might have someone you love who has a cervix, so have a look at their cervix. And if you don't, then too bad. But cervix has so many different, this is one woman who's taken a picture every day, and you see how it changes. It gets a little bit open, it gets a little bit close, it changes position. It's very cool what's going on in there. So do have a look at your cervix if you can. You might know if you have a cervix, when you have an orgasm, this is what happens. See that amazing movement of the cervix pushing against the vaginal wall on the other side. I see people with open mouths here. Next time you have an orgasm, if you have a cervix, try and feel your cervix and try and see if you can feel it pushing quite violently to the other side of your vagina. So we know this, right? The ovaries, fallopian tubes. Fallopian tubes, you see the fingers? This is a picture of ovulation. So in the ovaries, there's lots of eggs. And when you ovulate, some of the follicles contain the eggs and become quite swollen and round. And then one of them usually bursts open, and then an egg comes out. So we see that happening here. So the yellow bit contains the egg. It's not itself the egg, but that contains the egg. So this happens if you have a regular menstrual cycle and you ovulate. Inside your body, this comes popping out. And what's even cooler is that you then have the fallopian tubes which touch the ovaries. So they aren't exactly connected to each other, which is what you often see in images of anatomy books, but they are, in fact, sweeping with the ovarian fingers of the fallopian tubes against the ovaries. And they move, as you can see here, at the rhythm of the heartbeat, just sweep, sweep, sweep against this ovary. And you see the finger here, it's quite small, but then when you ovulate, it becomes erect and it becomes much bigger. It's a quite amazing erection, which you will see in a minute, and then it becomes so large that it can sweep the egg. You see how big it is now? Now you can see it sweeping the egg out of the ovary into your fallopian tubes. More open mouths, amazing. This is what's going on inside your bodies, or those bodies of those you love. So, how amazing is that? This is my own ovary. This is an ultrasound of it. You can see one follicle. It's getting a little bit bigger, so that one's about to ovulate. There's also a couple of other follicles that are also growing, which is normal. So normally if you have ovaries and you ovulate, you have a couple of follicles that develop with only one burst, like you saw in that earlier image. And it could also be that you have endometriosis, and then your ovary may look like this. This is not my ovary, but my left ovary looks like that. So my right ovary looks like this, and my left ovary looks like that. So that means that a little bit of the womb lining, the stuff that's called the endometrium, has started to grow elsewhere. and it can grow on top of the fallopian, on top of the ovary, for example, and then you see this. It's not necessarily a problem, but for some women, they can get extra pain during their periods, they might have some mental health issues, and so if you think that you might have endometriosis, which is 1 in 10 women, do check it out with your GP or other doctors to see if that happens. And another really common thing is PCOS, which you see here. There's lots of big follicles, and so in PCOS you get quite a few follicles that develop, but it's not necessarily working as it should. So it's, again, 1 in 10 women have this. Have a look around. You might have a sign of that if your hormones are a bit out of balance or if your menstrual cycle is irregular. So check that out because it's really undiagnosed and would be good to know. And then if everything goes well and you ovulate, then, of course, afterwards you menstruate. And menstruation is also a fantastic, interesting process in which you shed your womb lining, and it's the only part of the body that renews every month, but also that you can just let go of without getting any scar tissue, without having any problems after that. So that's an amazing process that we can also celebrate, but of course it's also possible to make a baby, which is what Joyce is going to talk about. There you go.
She definitely outdressed me, okay? So we're going to talk now about making a baby. So let's go. So we do have a bit of a gender inequality with making a baby, okay? So first of all, women ovulate, they ovulate only 1 egg per month. So we have about 500 menstrual cycles in our life, so we ovulate about 500. Okay, the guys in the room that produce sperm, okay, every time you ejaculate, oh, I'm going to throw the sperm out, here comes the sperm, oh! That's not life-size, by the way. When a man ejaculates, on average, it's 100 million. We only need 1, guys? What's going on? 100 million sperm per ejaculate. So if I don't know if any of you have watched the Netflix series about the guy, the donor from Amsterdam. There might be a few people that used to in this room. There are some guys that get a bit carried away and he's got, well, I don't know how many kids, we don't know how many kids, hundreds of kids. So we also need the womb. We need the womb for sure. So this is what happens in our beautiful fallopian tube. The egg normally waits around the end with the fimbria, where it got picked up, and the sperm needs to swim through the cervix, it'll be deposited at the top of the vagina near that beautiful cervix, swim up through the cervix into the womb, and then down the fallopian tubes where it should meet the egg. And then, if it fertilizes, it will travel back down and then implant in the womb. So, there are more than one way to make a baby. So nowadays, with technology, Lucy's going to tell you more about fertility treatments that we can use. And now for women, if there's a single woman or 2 women, a same-sex female couple, then they need some sperm. They've probably got eggs. They've got 2 wombs between them, but they need some sperm. So ideally, not going to Jonathan, whatever his name was, the Amsterdam inseminator. Ideally going to a clinic, but there are other ways to get sperm for sure. So they don't always need to go to a clinic to get sperm. Now, if we have a single man or a same-sex male couple, they have probably got a lot of sperm between them, but they need eggs and they need a womb. So to do that, they would go to a fertility clinic. So we've got to get the eggs, and Lucy's going to tell you more, and the sperm through that. And they need a womb, so they have to use something called surrogacy. So certainly, there are different ways to make children than the sort of heterosexual couple. But there are different regulations in various countries, and we're here, so you may not know, but Lucy and I are here for the one of the biggest fertility conferences in the world called ESHRA. I always call it the Glastonbury of conferences. There's over 11,000 people. It's just amazing. It's a whole village that they build when we have it. So we're here all week in Amsterdam discussing fertility. And also, fertility for people who do not identify as their sex at birth, they obviously might still want to have children, but it's really important for them to know that if they're transitioning and using hormones or surgery to transition, that will affect their fertility. So if they produce eggs, they can freeze their eggs before they undergo any treatment. They may or may not wish to keep their womb. They may or may not wish to have a pregnancy at any time in the future. They may wish to use a surrogate. There's so many different options for them, but they need to know about their options. And for those that produce sperm, we can certainly freeze their sperm before they transition. But it's important to note that some of this is unknown territory for fertility, and we do know that people taking testosterone, they may still have a period, and some of them have unexpectedly got pregnant. They didn't think they could get pregnant because of the way they were having hormone treatment, but they have. So, another gender inequality, I'm afraid to say, is that men produce sperm throughout their lives. So from puberty to death, I'm sure you can all think of some famous celebrities, rock stars who were 60, 70, 80, who have fathered children. Anyone want to shout a couple out? Al Pacino, you're showing your age by saying Al Pacino. Charlie Chaplin, if you're saying Charlie Chaplin, you're definitely nearer my age. But we've got Mick Jagger. The kids actually say Trump. And some of them say Boris Johnson, who was once the English MP. So, but the sperm do get less healthy as they get certainly over 40. So they have fewer healthy sperm. It can take the increased risk of miscarriage and take it longer to get their partner pregnant. But females, we have a limited lifespan on our fertility. So from puberty to menopause, we are actually decreasing our fertility. Bad news. Whoever designed us really need to sort something out. This is a picture from my book. It shows the women's age down the bottom. And unfortunately, as we get older, nearer menopause, our fertility goes down, and at the same time, our risk of miscarriage goes up. So I hope some of you do know this, but women are born with all of the eggs we're going to have. So we're born with a few million eggs, about 1 to 2 million eggs. By puberty, most of those have just been reabsorbed by the body. So by puberty, we've only got between about 200 and 400,000 potential eggs left. They're in those follicles that Lucy showed you. And then we ovulate that one every month. Well, you can do the maths. What happens to the others? So each month, about 1,000 get reabsorbed by our body, and by the menopause, they have all gone. And it's not just the quantity of those eggs, but the quality goes down. So there's little chromosomes within our eggs that we're inheriting from our mother, and they become really confused, and we have an increased risk of miscarriage, an increased risk of a chromosomally atypical child, and a decreased chance of getting pregnant. So once we are in our mid-30s, you will always know someone who got pregnant naturally in their late 40s, but overall, the majority of women will start decreasing their fertility after the age of 35. And we are seeing celebrities that are having children in their 50s, but they have definitely used some sort of assisted conception to do that. Come on, technology. So globally, you may have seen this. It's been in the press a lot. Globally, people are having less children, and they're having children later. So this graph on the left, a little bit complicated, but it shows all the different countries. The white diamonds are for 1970. No, the black diamonds are for 1970. The white diamonds are 2020, and then the blue bars are now. Sorry, 20. The blue bars are now, and showing that the age that women are having children, their first child globally, is increasing. So if we scroll across from age 30, we see so many, almost all the countries, women are having their first child at 30, and that leaves a very little window for them to try and have their family. And it's also going up for men. And this is the total fertility rate. So the total fertility rate is the average number of children a woman will have in different countries. And in the 50s, it was 5.4. And now it's 2.3 globally. And when I was a kid in England, we used to say people had 2.4 children. Now in the UK, it's nearer 1.6. And look at places like Malta. Look at South Korea. They're having very few children. And the work that we've done, again, Reen has done some work on this with young people, people still want 2 to 3 children. So they're not having the desired family size. 20% of women don't have children past their reproductive age. Some of them will be by choice, but some of it is because they've missed the boat. They have a lack of understanding of how this all works, and they are not having their desired number of children. So with ESHRA, I set up a few years ago this International Reproductive Health Education. We've produced a poster for young people. We co-designed it with them, all about the main things that we've spoken to you about. So we want people to get out in schools and everywhere and teach all of this. So I'm handing back to Lucy now.
Lovely to have this wonderful applause. So when we think about the changes in when and how many children people have, that's linked to the idea of family planning, which of course has come from previous century in which there were new possibilities of the contraceptive pill, but also the struggle for abortion, which continues. And shout out to Rebecca Gompers, who sits right there, who's an amazing abortion doctor here. But of course, the struggle for abortion legalization and work continues here. And there's a variety of ways, including having a look at your cervix, of checking out when you're fertile. And so all these things have contributed to people's agency in deciding whether and when they have children. So that also means that the question of when you have children has become more culturally significant in relation to the end of the female reproductive lifespan. And so this question of the biological clock has come up again and again, and Joyce has spoken about that. But it's not only a question of our bodies and biology. It's really a term that has started in the late 70s, which coincided when women started participating more in wage labor. And there was the women's liberation movement that was really important at the time. And so there was a guy called Richard Cohen who came up with this term, the biological clock, in relation to the idea of the career woman. And he presented it as the end of liberation. That was kind of the biological limit of women's liberation. And this idea that there is a conflict between our bodies and our careers is a trope that keeps coming back again with every new reproductive technology, whether it's IVF or egg freezing or egg donation. And it's not entirely the full story. But it is interesting to know that in the same year that this term was coined, the first IVF baby was born. It was called Louise Brown in '78. And since then, the idea of women delaying having children and the extent to which it can be counteracted by reproductive technologies is something that we see all the time in the newspapers. But the idea of women deciding to delay having a child doesn't really tell the story. We see that so much has changed. People have education much longer. There's much less job security these days. People have different kinds of relationship patterns. It's very hard to get a house. Sexual health has really been cut, so a lot more young people having sexual health issues, which can lead to fertility issues. Cost of living is an issue. And women can do so many exciting things with their lives besides having children that can kind of compete for the attention as well. Of course, it's not just about women, but men also make decisions in relation to when to have a child. And men, on average, have children 3 years later. So if we say that women are deciding to delay having a child, men are doing that even more so. And then there's all sorts of norms about, working too much or too little, or being too old or too young, and so on. So all these things contribute to this later reproduction. Let's skip that. And I think it's a shame that we have these really exciting bodies, but that they are presented, if you search on Google for female fertility, what you see is just downward graphs. Whereas if you look for male fertility, you see all sorts of things. You see like sad man, you see happy men, you see babies, you see all sorts of sperm, you see some testicles, but it's certainly more exciting than just, And it gets worse. Look at aging. You search for aging. It's only white women. Well, there's one man, but it's very gendered. If you look at anti-aging, all the men have disappeared, and there's one woman of color, but apart from that, mostly white women putting cream on their face. So it's a very gendered thing to think about aging, and this is all playing part of the background of when we talk about fertility and aging. That plays a role. Because in fact, we can still have children, but it's just that it's harder to do that with our own eggs. So you see here, chances of getting a child with IVF go down over time. But if you use young eggs, the wombs still work generally. So eggs are important. So we go back to my ovary. And if we look at the eggs, one way to keep your eggs young is by freezing them. So you've probably heard of that. If you want to freeze your eggs, it's not a quick procedure. You need to spend 2 to 5 weeks injecting yourself in your belly. And then you can get an ovary like this. This is not my ovary, but you see there's lots of follicles that become big, and they, if everything goes well, contain mature eggs that then get sucked out by putting a sort of dildo in your vagina that has a needle on it that goes through the vagina wall into the abdominal cavity and sucks out the follicles with the eggs in them. It looks a bit like this in an operating theater, and then they can go into a liquid nitrogen tank and stay there. And then after that, you can fertilize them when you're ready. And then they go into this. This is an incubator. And this is the kind of incubator that also films the eggs as they develop. And they stay in there for 3 to 5 days. And then when they are done and everything goes well, you can put those embryos back into the womb with a procedure called transfer. And in that way, you can become your own egg donor. So you can keep this kind of thing. The only thing is that it doesn't have a very high success rate. It generally, there's a vast majority of women who freeze their eggs don't get children with them when they try to use them. And then about only 10% of women so far have returned to use their eggs. So it actually doesn't lead to that many babies, but it exists. And I think it's more important to think about it as something that we extend family planning about when you have children with the idea of fertility planning, of when to be fertile. And that becomes a really big question that has a lot of cultural implications for ourselves and for our gendered lives. So we see in various countries that this is very different. So in the Netherlands, egg freezing wasn't allowed from 2009 onwards when they proposed to do it at the AMC. And the main reason was that we had a Christian cabinet, but also that the people who were against it, they said vrouwen moeten kinderen krijgen op een leeftijd dat ze vruchtbaar zijn. So women should have children at an age that they're fertile. They weren't concerned about medical risk or about ethics, but this idea about you should be the right age has a really strong normative meaning. And you see in France, you weren't allowed to do IVF or freeze your eggs until 3 years ago. And in China, it's not allowed. I had a PhD student who wrote about that because you see a lot of Chinese women traveling across the world to freeze their eggs or get donor eggs. And in other countries, they promote it. So in Japan, they pay for women to freeze their eggs because they want to increase the birth rate. And France has changed around and is now the only country in the world since 3 years ago where you can freeze your eggs for free. And now there's a waiting list of a couple of years to do that. Yeah, I mean, it's great to an extent, but you do have to wait 2 to 3 years before you're finally ready to get it. And then in the US, you have a lot of parties, cocktail parties, and all sorts of marketing to promote it because it's become part of a big industry. So there's so many different political responses to egg freezing. Oh, we get a drink. Thank you so much. Yay. Joyce.
It's ovulating.
We have an egg in it.
Oh my goodness me! My cocktail is ovulating. See, it's yours. Look at yours.
I had an egg.
Oh my
it's
God!
bubbling.
Wow.
Here you go, Joyce. You go and talk.
Oh.
I'll go and drink.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers. I need to drink.
Can we cheer?
Cheers.
We've got eggs in our cocktail. Hey.
Oh. Oh my. Oh, lovely. Oh. Shame I've got to talk for a bit.
Oh my God.
Delicious. Oh, I like doing. In England, we have a pint of science. We get a pint of beer. We don't get a cocktail. I love having a cocktail. Right, so I'm going to talk now about the menopause. Can we all shout out menopause? Woo! I can tell you that it is fantastic being a postmenopausal woman. I'm a happy 61, I was going to say 65 then, 61-year-old postmenopausal woman. I love it. One of my dear friends says she's never had such a fertile time as since she's been postmenopausal. So she had a little play on the words fertility there. So menopause. Now, one thing, again, with language, like our vulva, we don't quite get the words right. So I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but in the UK, we use menopause incorrectly. Menopause actually means that a woman has been for 1 year with no period. And then, as soon as that day happens, she's actually postmenopausal. And I've been doing, as I said, I've been doing focus groups with lots of women about their periods. One of the women said, when I stop my period and it's been 1 year, I'm having a party. I think that's a great idea to have a postmenopause party. So what we're normally talking about when we talk about the stage of menopause is actually the perimenopause. And there's quite some people that have never heard of that word or only recently heard of the word perimenopause. So perimenopause is when the periods start to change. They will actually, well, they'll definitely change because they will stop. So they will stop at some point. So women often see a change in the pattern of their periods, but there are other symptoms that they can get. And the menopause and the perimenopause gets a really bad name because of these symptoms. So when they get these symptoms, it's a transition from your fertility or your fertile years to being post-menopause when you can no longer have children, unless you're using an egg donor. So it can be very difficult for the majority of women. About 80% of the women, they have symptoms that can really affect their well-being and their quality of life. But it is a transition, and I want to try and readdress that balance a bit. So the perimenopause is the time when you have those symptoms, periods are starting to change. So let's have a little look. I am an educationalist. I want everyone to understand all of these really important things, and I've been doing this for a long, long time. This is a survey I did. I've got lots of data. This is all published work, but we asked women under 40 and women over 40, how informed about the menopause did you feel before age 40? So I think everyone before age 40, everyone, not just people who are going to experience this, need to understand what this is and how it's going to affect them. So the two big colours you can see at the top on both of those graphs, they're different, slightly different demographics. They are both not informed at all, which is the top one. That's a disaster. And the next one is somewhat informed. The next one is very informed. I want that little beep that we see there on the third row to be what everyone is. I want everyone to be very informed about menopause. So I just keep that graph in because it's got lots of lovely colours. Don't worry about it. In the surveys that I did, I gave the women a list of over 50 potential menopause symptoms. And I said, you tell us what you feel is affecting you and may be due to this perimenopause. The most common are the important: irritability, poor concentration, poor memory, brain fog, low mood. I won't read them all out. So you probably heard about hot flushes, night sweats. They're the common things that we talk about. But so many of these are psychological issues. Remember, those hormones are really powerful. At puberty, those hormones in males and females, they're spiraling up. So puberty can be a bit of a difficult time. You can get, again, some of these symptoms. Menopause, those hormones are spiraling down, so they're all over the place. So it's not surprising you get similar effects that you do at puberty. But this really is a very unresearched area, which we're trying to put to rights. So what women said about this in all the years of work I've been doing, they said they had a lack of education. They said they had no idea what was going to happen to them, and it really did impact their lives. And one quote, I love this quote at the bottom: "The lack of information is shocking. I didn't know the symptoms, so I didn't join the dots until I spoke to a friend. We are both nurses and we didn't know." And that's a really, really common response. But they also said that they have a problem with their general practitioner. So when they go to the doctor, what doctors normally say is, "You're not old enough," or "No, it's not the perimenopause, it probably is something else." So all those psychological symptoms, it's quite common, certainly in the UK, for women to be given antidepressants, which is not going to treat it if it's because of the perimenopause. So what we say is that on average, women will have stopped their periods for 1 year when they're 51. That's an average. The most common ages women stop their periods is between age 45 and 55. We're doing a bit of science today. What we see is a normal distribution. 51's at the top, but we have the 45 to 55 either side. So that's still totally normal to stop your periods. So if you're stopping your periods at 45, it's normal. And you can have those perimenopausal symptoms for a few years or even up to 10 years before they stop. So these symptoms can happen in your 30s for sure. So the GPs often, if they were like 48, they'd send them away and say, "Oh, you're too young." So I don't know why some GPs don't understand about that. So the women felt stigma, they felt taboo, and they felt forgotten. So post-menopause, I am telling you, it's freedom. We do have to embrace our menstrual cycle, but it goes. And I think those that have a menstrual cycle, this is a real sort of wonderful thing to experience, because it can be difficult to have a period and the menstrual cycle for 50 years of our lives. But having this change at this time of our really important time of our life, where we have no more cycling hormones, no more menstrual cycle, no more periods, no more premenstrual syndrome, and no more need for contraception, is an exciting new time for women. And I'm interviewing 50 women, I've almost finished, for over 50 for my next book, which is about good health and happiness over 50. And they are telling me they have entered a new realm of their life. It is so liberating. They're rediscovering hobbies, creativity. Lots of them have changed their job. Some of them changed their partner. It's really liberating. But probably no one's told you that, because we created an image of the older woman as she ages, and I'll put some face cream on. Very few people tell women that actually postmenopause can be fabulous. It really, really can be fabulous. I'm not alone. There's lots of other colleagues that do that. This is me cold water swimming. I'm going to be cold water swimming in Amsterdam. That's me at the top in one of the beaches we go to. This is lots of menopausal women liberated and fabulous about this time. So I think it's really unfair for younger women to just paint the perimenopause and menopause as doom and gloom and negativity, and I'm not undermining it at all. It's really difficult for some women, and we need to know about it and support them through it. But there is light at the end of the tunnel, honestly, and I'm not the only one. So woohoo! Bring it on! So in the UK, we have set up a group to set up a UK program to teach everyone about all the things I've just said. And my colleague Shima Tarek found this fantastic way of describing it. We're calling it In Tune. We want women to be in tune with their menopause, in tune with their body, and in tune with each other throughout the whole of our lives, but especially around this stage. And we are co-designing this and being very inclusive in our project. So we're very excited. My last point I want to make to you today: everything I've said to you is underpinned by how we lead our lives. Lifestyle is so important. One of my colleagues, Susan Saunders, I interviewed on my podcast, said, it's in our hands. All of this is in our hands. It's never too late, but we need to look after our lifestyle. We need to look after our nutrition, our exercise, our sleep, our friendships and community, really important, and our mental health to be really the optimum time that we can throughout our lives. And as we get older, it gets more important. But we need to start this early. Our menstrual cycle, our fertility, our menopause, men's health as well, we need to do it. Handing over, I can drink my cocktail now. Handing over to Lucy.
Can I just ask what cocktail that was? Because that was delicious. Mike, are you here? What?
Passion wagon.
Passion wagon. Everybody, please have a passion wagon, because it has a bubbling egg in it, and it's glorious.
We ran out of cocktails.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So I would recommend that one.
We don't have any more. Sorry.
So let's keep going. So we've been thinking about the menopause, but it doesn't mean that reproductive aging necessarily ends at menopause. If you've frozen your eggs, you can still have children with those frozen eggs, although, like I said, it's only about 10 to 15% of women who actually have children with those eggs. So here's someone who did. But, for example, the poster woman, or the poster child, who froze her eggs and was on the cover of Bloomberg with it, a couple of years later tried to use them but found that they didn't work and was very sad about that. So there is a possibility of losing your fertility twice in this sense. But what's even more interesting is that you can continue your fertility after your own lifespan, so after you die. So, for example, this young woman was only 17 when she got into a car accident and was brain dead. And then her parents wanted to extract her eggs so they could have grandchildren from them. So they went to court and they got permission to take the eggs out, but the local community responded with dismay and concern, so they didn't do it in the end. So they didn't have grandchildren, and sadly, their daughter also passed away. But you can also decide to freeze your eggs and have children after you die. So, for example, this young woman A sad story, she got diagnosed with bowel cancer when she was 23, and then she had her eggs frozen. And she asked her parents to use those eggs. She asked her mum if she could get pregnant and give birth to her grandchildren with them, because she really cared about her possibility of reproduction. So when she was dying, and she died at 28, to her it was a comfort to know that she had those eggs, and then they tried to have children with those frozen eggs. So this idea of reproducing after you die is creating all sorts of new questions in our lives. For everybody who freezes their eggs, because you always have to fill in a form to say, what do you want to do when you die? Do you want to give it to certain people? Do you want them to be destroyed? Do you want to give them to scientific research? So this question of your fertility after death really continues. So in those days, we extend our fertility later on to life, but the idea of infertility comes much earlier. You may see lots of education initiatives from with a lot of overlap between marketing and education. You see egg freezing startups that encourage people to freeze their eggs early. Also by testing their hormones, the AMH hormone is a big one, where they say, if you learn that your eggs and sperm aren't great, you should freeze your eggs now, before it's too late. And if you learn that they are doing great, then the time is now to freeze your eggs, because you're now at your peak fertility. So this idea of fertility testing can be helpful, but it can also really be an indication to put you on a pathway to treatment when that may not necessarily be necessary. And you see this primarily in a private context. So you see in the US and in the UK, but also in the Netherlands, that there are a lot of private equity investors, hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds and euros being invested into the fertility sector, and particularly in egg freezing, leading to all sorts of new startups that focusing on egg freezing, as well as insurance and lending companies, and that they really create a situation in which people are being encouraged to freeze their eggs earlier and earlier. So the investors, the equity investors, say, oh, there's a promise of a sizable upside to come, which means that there's a promise of profit in the future if we encourage people to freeze their eggs younger, because then a lot more people become potential patients. So they hire people like Dr. Oz or The Bachelorette from the reality TV show to encourage this younger freezing for women in their 20s or early 30s. And that's something to be aware of. So they might also say, here you can get free testing, and you'll say, you'll never be more fertile than you are today, so you really need to hurry up and freeze your eggs now. But freezing your eggs really early may not necessarily make financial sense, because you can see if you freeze your eggs, for example, at 25, if you're in the US, you pay about $1,000 a year to keep those eggs frozen. So if you keep them frozen for 15 years when you might need them, then you basically spent the money twice. Here you also see the difference between private and public health systems, because in New York it can cost you $1,000, and in the Netherlands it's about 50 euros a year to freeze, to keep your eggs frozen. So you really see the markup in private health systems, which is why it's so important that we keep caring about our health system as a public good. And then if you want to go even further, you also have the opportunity of ensuring your fertility of your children while they're still toddlers. So here we see some insurance for children and their potential future infertility. So all these ways are really changing what it means to be fertile later in life and to become infertile much earlier in life. And all of this may become entirely irrelevant if we look at the future of what reproduction might bring. So we are here today at Paradiso, but this week we'll have ASHRA, the amazing conference with 11,000 people at the RAI, and we'll see a lot of inventions linked to artificial intelligence. And that's already clinically implemented. There's a lot of research going into it, where there are algorithms as well as AI systems that are deciding which embryos to be implanted, which eggs to be fertilized, which sperm to fertilize them with, and which people to match up with each other in egg donation and sperm donation. And so we'll see that AI is really going to also shift how we reproduce and who's going to be born. We have much more automation these days. So this is an automated freezing machine. So you can, these are from tomorrow. So if you have your eggs frozen or your sperm or your embryos, they can go into this robot and go to a warehouse offshore somewhere outside of the city and leave them there. And this is something that currently has received a lot of investment, hundreds of millions of dollars from the founders of YouTube, from the founders of 23andMe, to create a machine where you can input the egg and the sperm, and then it comes out as a genetically tested embryo. And we don't know if this is going to work. They're trying to make it happen. But we do know that it's a vision for the future that's generating so much capital. So that's directing the research that's happening today. What is happening today, and this is the first time this year, just a few months ago, the first baby was born, is the commercial whole genome testing of embryos. So this is a company, and I spoke with the CEO, that called Orchid Health, and you can then get your embryos completely tested, the way in which you would do with 23andMe, and get a report for each of the embryos and decide which ones to implant. So that includes what kind of diseases they may or may not develop, of course what gender they may have, but also much more detail than you normally would have with regular embryo testing. So this is a new thing, and it's commercially available in the US. What doesn't exist yet, but what does exist for sheep, is that there's much more research looking into artificial wombs or ectogenesis. And if we were to develop this further, and also for humans, it will totally change who can have children and to what extent we would need surrogacy or wombs even to reproduce. And then the most radical option would be IVG, in vitro gametogenesis, and I'm going to close with that. So in vitro gametogenesis is the option of taking your normal cells, so it could be some cells in your cheek or blood cells or skin cells, and then turning them into stem cells, induced pluripotency cells, IPC cells, which means that they have the possibility of then differentiating into all sorts of cells. And that could be an egg or a sperm. And so that means, first of all, that you could create eggs or sperm much later in life. So when your own eggs don't work anymore, you could use some saliva and turn that into eggs. Or, so that's an age thing. You could change gender, so you could be a man who turns their cells into eggs, or a woman who turns their cells into sperm, which would totally change the idea of how people can reproduce genetically in relation to gender. And also, you could make much more. So now we're quite limited. When you do IVF, you only have a couple of embryos, and then maybe you can test them or you can't. But if you were to do this, you could create thousands or millions of embryos and test all of them, and then implant them. Now, that would completely change the game. You wouldn't need egg freezing anymore, you wouldn't need IVF anymore, and it would completely change how you can do this. But of course, the issues are, is it actually going to be possible? It's not possible right now. It might take a few years or a few decades before it is. But also, is it ethically permitted? We were able to clone people for a long time, but we have agreed not to do that. So there are technologies that people don't agree not to use. And then there's also the question, who can use it? Because it will probably be very expensive and very hard to do. So then it may be quite an elite thing to do. But it is an interesting thing to think about. And it is good to remind ourselves that everything that Joyce and I talk about is very much of this generation, of the people who now are in their reproductive lifetime or after their reproductive lifetime. But the children who we may give birth to, or the children who haven't been born yet, might be dealing with very different questions when they stand on the stage in the future. So, concluding with all of this, I would like to encourage you to follow Joyce, who's an incredible social media wizard, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter. I refuse to say X. And she has an amazing book, In Your Fertile Years, which you can buy in the foyer. And she has a great podcast that you can listen to. And you can also follow me. I'm less cool. I just have Twitter. And I also have a book which you can read for free. You can download it for free if you search for my name and Freezing Fertility. And there's been a tegenlicht or backlight documentary which you can watch on NPO if you're Dutch about the book. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and for being here. And let's celebrate it together.